I ran local service ads for a real service-based business for 30 days, and the results were honestly a mix of exactly what I expected and a few things that I really didn't. It was kind of all over the place. Calls came in really fast, some were really good, and some were completely wrong. A few were from services that the business doesn't even offer, a few were from outside of the area. And the big question I had at the end of the month was, are the local service ads actually better than our regular search ads campaign, or are they just better at making the phone ring? So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the real numbers, what kind of leads came in, what went wrong, and what I'm changing into month 2 to try to fix it all. So let's get into it. So before we dig into the data, I want to set a little bit of expectations because I don't want anyone walking away from this video thinking that I'm rendering some kind of final verdict on whether local service ads are worth it after having just ran them for 1 month. I'm not. So this is the real performance review at our 30-day mark, and 30 days isn't a long enough data period to determine whether to continue with them or not, but I wanted to show how I'm tweaking them to try to see an improvement moving forward. And a couple of things to keep in mind as we go. This is a real client account. This isn't a theory account. This isn't hypothetical. I'm not just running a test campaign. This is an automotive shop here in the US, and so this is their real account performance. Secondly, this client is a newer business. They're under new ownership, but they've been around for quite a while, so they do have a lot of Google reviews. So they are fairly early in their growth cycle. So their current goal is call volume. They want the phone ringing. They need the phone to ring. They are willing to tolerate a little bit more of a lower quality lead right now if it means that they're getting opportunities in the door. So they just need momentum. And that matters because the strategy that I'd run for them is genuinely different from what I'd run for a more established business. So a business that is more established, one that already has a strong lead flow, a tight schedule, a team that doesn't have time to answer the phone for tire kickers, they tend to care way more about lead quality and way less about lead volume. So different stages, different priorities, they're in different campaign decisions. Treat month 1 of the local service ads as part results, part learning period. The question isn't just did calls come in? The better question that I'm asking is what kind of calls came in? What were the quality? Did they turn into booked appointments? And what can I fix going into the next month to make it even better? And something that the first month made really, really obvious is that lead volume and lead quality are not the same thing when it comes to local service ads. Okay, so let's get into the numbers. So at the top, we got 29 total calls for the month. That sounds great. But then I broke it down into amount of quality leads and amount of bad leads. And so of those 29 calls, I'd actually count only 13 of them as good leads, meaning that they were real people in the area that I was actually targeting and asking about a service that the business actually offers. 16 of those 29 calls were clearly not a good fit, and I'll get into it a little bit deeper as to why in a minute, but 5 of those good leads ended up booking an appointment. And ultimately, they did make their money back on the ads, so they did see a positive ROAS, which is great. The top line numbers looked good, but the real story is the call quality. So let's talk about what actually came in. Here's where it got interesting in the first week. In that first week, we got a few calls for industries that the business is not in or even remotely related to. So like I said, they're an automotive shop. And so we got some similar ones, people looking for a mobile mechanic, which is very similar, but not a service that they offer. But we also got 2 calls looking for a dentist and someone looking for fence repair. So those were clearly way off the mark. Thankfully, we weren't charged for those calls. So there was no money lost, but the calls still came in, the phone still rang, and someone on the team did have to deal with them. And so those all happened in the first week, which makes sense. Google is essentially testing the account in those early days. It's trying to figure out who you are, who's calling, and what kind of lead is a good fit for you. So the fix in the first few weeks was less about cutting things off and more about platform feedback. So every time a bad call came in, I go in and I mark the lead as bad and I give specific feedback as to why. So I'd put in that this was somebody looking for a dental service. We don't do that. This was for fencing. That's not our business. And then since then, those type of calls have dropped off. So touch wood, we haven't gotten them in the past 3 weeks. So this is one of the reasons why you can't just launch your local service ads and let it run. You have to train the account a little bit by marking every lead, whether it was good or bad, and telling Google why. The other thing that happened in week 1, we got a few calls from outside our target service area. So I wasn't specifically marking them as excluded locations, but they weren't being targeted either. And Google's location targeting isn't as precise as some people would like. It's not clean geographic fence around the service area that you're targeting. So Google can serve your ad to people who are in your area or people who are regularly in your area. So if somebody works in your service area but lives an hour away, Google might still show them your ad. If somebody is just driving through, same thing. So if somebody searched from your area last week and then is now sitting at home in the next town over, yeah, they might still see it. And the fix to this is to start excluding locations that are too far away to be realistic customers. So for this client, the practical cutoff was around a 20-minute mark. So if somebody is further away than that, they're probably not going to come drive to get their car fixed over 20 minutes. So I went into the account, I added exclusions for cities that were around the 20-minute mark and further out. And it didn't completely eliminate the calls from outside of our area, but I did notice a steep decrease in the amount of them, which is good. This is one of those things that sounds like it should be black and white. The campaign is set to a service area, so calls should come from that service area, right? But in the actual platform, it's a little bit more gray than that. Location targeting honestly is more like a filter than a fence. And sometimes you do have to tighten it after the campaign launches and you start seeing the data come in and listening to the calls. You may need to narrow down that location targeting or start adding exclusions from neighboring cities that are too far. Another issue that we saw early on with this account was we were getting calls for mobile mechanic, as in somebody who drives to your house and works on your car in your driveway. And so this business does not offer mobile mechanic services. They are a regular shop. So I started rating those leads as bad leads early on, but I didn't really notice a difference and we were still getting a few coming in. So I went a little bit deeper, and in the local service ads settings, there's a section where you choose which services you actually offer. There was an other toggle that was turned on, so I turned that off. And that pretty much cracked down on the mobile mechanic calls. We still get 1 or 2, but not nearly as many as we were before. Here's the lesson, and there is something that's specific to local service ads that doesn't really apply to search campaigns. With local service ads, your service settings matter a lot. You don't have the keyword level control like you do in a search campaign. You can't write negative keyword for mobile mechanic. You can't tighten up your match types. The service settings inside of the local service ads is your steering wheel, essentially. So if you leave things too broad, Google may take that as permission to test leads that aren't exactly what you want. So go through your service settings carefully, turn off the other option if you don't truly want anything outside of your core services, and just be specific. Okay, so what's my plan moving into month 2 with the local service ads? Because the goal of the month wasn't to hit some perfect number, it was to learn enough to make month 2 better. And week over week in month 1, everything was improving. So here's what I'm gonna do to make sure that that continues into month 2. Every single lead is getting marked properly. If they booked an appointment, I'm marking it as a good lead. If it was a bad lead, I'm marking that and putting in why. I'm archiving the ones that led nowhere. None of this gets skipped. So if a lead falls into the dashboard and nobody categorizes it, that lead is essentially worthless from a learning perspective. If somebody books an appointment, I'm adding the appointment date in the platform. And once the platform is actually completed, I'm going back in and adding the dollar amount of that job. So why am I doing this? It's because the platform can only learn from the signals that you give it. So if you don't mark the leads, Google has no way to know which ones turned into revenue. It treats every call the same. And if every call looks the same to Google, it's going to optimize for more calls that you're already getting, which is exactly what we don't want if some of those calls are bad. So the goal is to teach the platform what good actually means for this business. And good doesn't just mean somebody picked up the phone and called them. It means that somebody picked up the phone, booked an appointment, showed up and spent money. So I don't want Google to just find people who call. I want it to find people who call, book, and eventually buy. And the other big thing that I'm taking away from this month, and it's It's almost something that I didn't include in this video because it's not directly tied to local service ads, but I think it might be the most useful thing that we did notice. The local service ads platform records all of the calls so that you can go in and you can listen to them. And so while I was listening through the calls, which you should be doing if you run any type of paid ads with phone tracking, I did notice a pattern. A few of the calls that should have booked, they were good leads, they didn't. And it wasn't because the lead was bad. They were looking to get their car repaired. They were asking for a service that the shop actively does, but it was because of how the call was being handled. So this wasn't an ads problem. It wasn't a lead quality problem. It was a phone handling problem. So I brought it up with the customer gently because nobody loves hearing that your team's phone skills might be costing you appointments, but it's true. And to their credit, they're working on it now. And here's what matters most on those calls. And I want to be specific. How fast the phone gets answered matters. If the phone rings 6 times and goes to voicemail, you've already lost a lot of those leads. They're calling the next business on the search results before you can even have a chance to call them back. How confidently you answer the phone matters as well. So if somebody on the team sounds unsure, sounds like they're reading from a script, sounds like they don't really know if the business can help, or that they don't want to be answering the phones, that is a vibe that the caller picks up on immediately, and it can cost you bookings. And then the big one that we noticed in these calls is how clearly the next step gets offered. The best calls end with a specific time on the calendar. You're booking them in for an appointment, so you have to ask for the appointment. The worst one ends with, okay, well, yeah, give us a call or bring it in whenever is best for you. Those leads you'll never see. They don't end up booking. They don't end up coming in. And so a good lead can still be lost if the call gets handled badly. So your ads create all this opportunity, but if your team still can't convert them into a booked appointment, sometimes the campaign is doing its job, but the sales process is leaking, which is what we did notice in this campaign. There were 13 good leads, but only 5 booked appointments. So my job leading into month 2 is to cut down on the amount of bad leads because there was a lot, and their job is to increase the amount of booked appointments. Okay, now the big question, how did the local service ads perform compared to the Google search ads? Because for the same client at the same time, I also launched a regular Google search campaign. So it's the same business, same service area, same month. So we do get a real apples to apples comparison on which one performed better, the local service ads or the search campaign. So with the search campaign, we spent roughly the same amount. We spent around $750 and we saw 11 leads come in. So this is lower than my liking, but it is month 1 and we're working on bringing up that conversion rate. But of those 11 leads, I'd say 2 were bad quality, whereas the others were all really good quality. So the ratio of bad leads to good leads was much better with the search campaign, which makes sense since we have a lot more control over the search campaign. And ultimately, they also got 5 appointments from the search ads. So that matched the amount of booked appointments from the local service ads as well. But the ratio of good leads to booked appointments was much better with the search ads. The local service ads won on call volume. That was expected. Local service ads are inherently broader. So Google decides who's a fit based on service settings, not the precise keywords that you've chosen. So when the targeting net is wider, more calls come through. That's just how Google works. But the search campaign had fewer calls and a higher percentage of those calls booked an appointment. So here's the easiest way to summarize it. Local service ads won on volume, search won on quality. And I want to be careful here because I don't want this to sound like I'm declaring one universally better than the other. They're not direct competitors. They are different tools that are good at different things. And so the right choice really depends on what your business actually needs right now. So given all of the numbers, I think a lot of people would expect me to look at them and shut one off and lean into the other one. Pick a winner, commit to the better channel, but I'm not doing that, and here's why. So it's only been 1 month. It is genuinely too short of a window to make a real call either way, especially when month 1 is partially a learning period on both search and local service ads. So we've already cleaned up several issues that were dragging down the local service ads quality, and so that number in month 2 should look a lot different, hopefully better than month 1 did. The client stage also matters as well. So like I said in the beginning, they are a newer business in a new ownership phase and they need volume right now. So they need the phone ringing, they need conversations happening, they need momentum. And so local service ads are definitely doing that for them, even if the lead quality is a little bit messier than I'd like. And then search is valuable because the quality is so much stronger. So the leads are tighter, more intent driven, and they book at a higher rate. So running both gives us three things: more total lead flow from local service ads, cleaner, more controlled demand from search, and more data, so side by side to keep comparing as we go. If this were a more established business, like I said in the beginning, with strong existing lead flow, a packed schedule, and a team that didn't have the bandwidth to answer those low quality calls, I'd probably be a lot less tolerant of the low quality local service ads calls. But for where this business is right now, volume is what they're mainly after. And so the strategy that we're running serves the stage that business is in. So heading into month 2, we are still running both. We're not changing budget. We're not changing any of the strategy or leaning into budget on one platform over the other. We're going to keep it as is, and we're going to continue optimizing both platforms so that we have a longer data frame to compare it to. So once month 2 is done, I'll update another video and we'll look at how things have changed from month 1 to month 2 and if they are still comparable at all. So before I wrap up, I want to make sure that you understand the real trade-off with local service ads, because I don't think this gets discussed enough when local service ads are recommended. They are easier to launch than a search campaign in a lot of ways. The setup is a lot simpler, the interface is simpler. You don't have to write ad copy, you don't build your keyword lists, and you don't pick your match types. And so that makes it really appealing, especially for business owners who feel overwhelmed by the regular Google Ads platform, but still want to run some sort of ads themselves. But you can't control local service ads the way you can with the search ads, and that's the trade-off that you give. You can choose your services to a degree, but not with the same precision as with keywords. And so, for example, if this client, this automotive shop, wanted to focus on one specific type of vehicle, like let's say they only want to do luxury cars, that would be nearly impossible to do with local service ads. The platform doesn't give you that level of granularity with targeting. So you can pick services from the menu, and that's roughly where that steering ends. Search, by contrast, gives you a lot more steering power. You pick the keywords, you pick your negative keywords, you write your ad copy, you choose the landing page, you choose the match types, you decide exactly which searches you want to compete for and which ones you don't. Local service ads give you more volume but less precision. Search gives you less volume but more precision. So local service ads are great when you want more swings at the plate, essentially when you need more volume. Search is what you use when you need more control over who is calling you or what services they are calling you for. So that's where we landed after 30 days. The local service ads did bring in calls. They brought in more volume than search, but they also brought in a lot more lead quality issues, especially in that first week before we started getting things tweaked and dialed in a little bit better. On both platforms, they did make their money back and they did have a positive ROAS, which is great leading into month 2. And we're just going to continue building on that momentum and continue optimizing both. So local service ads can absolutely work, but they are not set it and forget it. You have to watch the calls, you have to mark the leads, you have to adjust the settings, and actually track what turns into revenue. And this is exactly why I don't like judging campaigns just by how many leads come in, because a campaign can look great in the Google Ads dashboard and still not be doing what your business actually needs it to do, which is bring in paying clients. And speaking of that, when I said the search campaign won on lead quality this month, I did mean it. The leads that came in through a properly built search campaign do tend to be more intent-driven, more specific, and more likely to actually book appointments. So if you've been running local service ads alone and feel like the calls aren't quite landing the way that you hoped, a clean search campaign running alongside it is usually the missing piece. So click right here and watch my video on how to set up a Google Ads search campaign, where I'll walk you through exactly how I built the one that's running for this same client right now. So head on over there and I'll see you there.